Alrighty guys, welcome to the first Dark and Darker video that we're going to be doing basically to try and get the devs' attention, because this game, in a single playtest that spanned a week and a half, rivaled the top 10 Steam games that were out at that time. Now, this is a game that is so unbelievably fun.
Would you like to be friends?
Sure. Let me help with the mummies. Let me help with the mummies.
No! No! Why? Why would he do this?
Kill that one.
You can't turn off the juice! I believe this could be the next big game. I want to cherish that, right? Like, we want to bring as much panache as we can to help grow the community. And that's what this video is about today. I was originally going to do a huge video. It was going to be like 30-40 minutes long, covering all these things, the positives and the negatives of Dark and Darker. But instead, what I'm going to do for the YouTube algorithm,
shout out,
we are going to try to do it under 10 minutes, okay? So let's dive on into today's episode. This one is going to be talking about the things that is loot being tied to your MMR. The loot that you bring into a dungeon determining your MMR. So that way people of equal loot value will be able to go against each other and you'll just have to outplay them, right? When games do this, there is no reason to advance in the game with that loot progression, right? There's no drive to advancing your loot. People just find weapons that feel great and they just feel the best and just continue to engage in PvP at the lower ranks, putting newer players at risk of running into sweats at earlier stages of the game. What was that? Man, thought he could just walk at me. There was the ability to just kind of buff up one person with a cleric and a wizard, and you could just haste, protect, you know, heal, and then also just ignite his weapon, and he would just go in and just 1v3. Because even if you're doing damage with your low level gear, you weren't able to survive against a completely crafted, armored, kitted out fighter. This creates a huge discourse, and they're like, oh, we'll just outplay him. Ranger can put down traps, and if he's trapped, then you can get headshots. It's like, okay, I see the idea. I appreciate you. But we're going to talk about how we can change that just from happening, right? Without having to rely on new players cultivating perfect strategies to, in essence, just survive. I personally, after having played the cycle, I'm going to use this example because the advice that I gave, they ignored it and it ended up just kind of killing their game. One of the big problems with that game is that they had a thing called a safety pocket.
what the hell? Where'd that come from?
I taught myself how to keister.
How to
Yeah.
keister up the keister?
Look, the electronic toothbrush part still works.
Oh no.
And I don't want this in the game either. The safety pocket was when you go into the dungeon, you could pick up an item and put it in your safety pocket. If you die, it's basically insurance and you get it when you spawn in your hub world again. With a safe pocket, even when you were constantly getting outgeared, you could slowly progress through your quests. You could upgrade this pocket by doing missions and all this stuff. It turned the game into a grind fest. I hated it. It's like, okay, well, you can put that monster leg in your safe pocket. That way, when you die, you can sell it to your faction. It's like, okay, well, how many do I need? 15. But you can guarantee it every time. I have to drop 15 times? Or I could just try to risk it all and just do it in one go. It's like, obviously, I did it in one go because, you know, Twitch streamer extraordinaire. I wasn't going to stop. But when it comes to a game like this that actually has a ring and it's not a separate world that you drop onto with players, the same issue is going to arise, but we handle it differently. So in Dark and Darker, in the most recent playtest number 4, they added the Goblin Caves for a solo experience adventure. I loved that idea. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Goblin Caves. Then we'll go on to the dungeon and we'll talk about how these changes that I want to make benefit the casual player and the professional players, like content creators and people who have too many hours a week to play the game. Glocktane. Anyway, the first change that I want to make, I want to keep the Goblin Caves, but I want to limit them to only green items. I don't want you to be able to bring in anything higher than a green item. I want it to stay a solo adventure, and I want them to kind of keep it the way it is, maybe a little change with like different mobs and bosses that we see in there. The reason why is going to be explained in a bit.
Just stick with me.
The main dungeon, the one that you can drop into with 3 players, I want them to remove the majority of gray weapons and gray armors. Keep the talismans gray. keep the loot like the gold gray. We don't want to spiral out of control here. Now, I'm not saying get rid of them entirely. I'm saying reduce the amount, and that will fix so much. When you change the loot pools in the maps to become more of a gradient that continues across all the different maps, instead of overlapping so heavily, the solo cave becomes a place of learning and soft grinding, where instead of grinding for white items for what feels like sometimes hours, risking running into fully kitted teams, mobs that take a long time to kill, as opposed to the goblin dungeon, you grind in the goblin caves where you aren't consistently going up against 3 stacks of tryhards, a duo of tryhards, essentially limiting the variables, right? If you do run into one tryhard, it is an isolated environment in which you can learn from. These are when you die to things that aren't insanely oppressive. If you just get killed by like a rogue, how did he get in that position to kill you? But if you die 2v1, what are you thinking? Like, fucking 2v1s. That's what a casual player thinks. Then you move onto a dungeon that will have harder PvP because of team coordination, increasing the skill gap, and harder mobs and enemies, right? But you have better than default gear to walk in with, creating a compelling and linear experience. Even if you lose that gear on the first run, it's not like you're gonna have to disband and go loot the goblin caves again over and over. You'll have the money from the items you evac with, so that way you can buy from the merchants. It's a nice soft padding, so that way you have room to grow. Then you can tie MMR loosely to your gear. Obviously keep it based off of the other factors, like how often are you evacing, you know, like what are you making out with, like what loot are you constantly getting? All those big factors that I'm sure a lot of companies don't disclose. It should have some sway on your MMR, right? The reason is because if we can keep them semi-split at the beginning when there's a large influx of players, we will then create and cultivate different pools of playstyles. But think about when you're starting out in a game, the casual player experience. If I walk in with default equipment, I stood no chance against somebody who had blue items or above. You just didn't. The gear exponentially increased your power level. So much so. Now, of course, we didn't have talent. We didn't have like the training and like the perk system that they truly want. This is all playtest. I'm trying to get it out ahead of this train. Right? This is what we want to avoid. We want to avoid people figuring out ways to abuse the MMR system to pub stomp the casual players and scare off the player base. That's the biggest thing. So, best way to combat this is to reward the people who grind and reward early engagement in the game. You want to take care of the people at the end of the spectrum and the people at the very bottom. People who don't understand this game need to have a way to actually learn the mechanics in a safe environment where they can actually stand a chance of outplaying. You don't want to have to say, okay, well, if they just do this, X, Y, and Z, and this, they could outplay a purple armor. No, it's oppressive, and people don't want to play against that shit at all, right? People don't want to play against the TTVers who are just PvPing while they're trying to figure out how to kill a skeleton. That's just not how it works. What this does is average Joe Schmo can load into a goblin cave, and it's like 9-12 minutes. It's not a huge time commitment at all, like at all. You do that, you walk around, you get hit by a trap for 50% of your HP, you're like, whoa, there's a trap there? That's how much damage it did? Damn. To your default armor and your default like weapon and everything. Not even the gray one, just the default where it's like no bonuses. And then, you know, you sit in a corner and you rat and you freak out a little bit. And then a little blue portal pops up and you interact with it. You get out, you evac, and it's like, oh, wow, okay, all right, for sure. Protecting the casual players and the people who are learning these mechanics, they don't have people to just like teach them the game, right? They have to go out and learn it. And maybe, you know, the people who search up on YouTube, things like that. You, buddy, you're really cool and handsome. What this does, it creates an environment where they have the potential to outplay these green level enemies because the skill gap isn't so large. It's only like this large. In the game that we have now, if the solo wants to go into the main dungeon, they're still, because I mean, I like the main dungeon so much more than the goblin caves. And since I understand all the mechanics, I can go into the goblin caves and just like, I literally extract 6 out of 6 times because I understand the game and the mechanics. I'm not a solo player. I do this for a living. We want to protect the casual player from that kind of thing because I loaded it with a blue bow and nobody could stop me, right? But when I had a green bow, there was a couple times where an invisible barbarian was sitting next to the little blue pillar, or a rogue was sneaking around a corner, or I get domed by a ranger when I only hit him twice because he didn't die. Because I didn't have that blue bow. I only had a green bow. Instead of the +5 agility and +5 strength, I had +1 or +2. These small differences matter because there's so many pieces of armor. When you do this, even if the casual player isn't getting kills in the solo lobby, they are gaining gold, to which they can then buy from the merchants bandages, potions. They learn how to interact with the mobs efficiently, navigate the traps, and figure out where the ring is, right? So that way when they do go into the dungeon, they're not going default up against blue gear and purple gear, right? They're not just going to get pub stomped. They'll have some green gear. And now, of course, it's not perfect. It's still going to be really hard. But 3 guys with green gear at least stand a chance against that buffed up fighter running at them. That newer team has a full kit of green armor or green equipment, whatever you want to call it, has a way better chance to outplay the tryhard sweats that find new and unique ways to abuse the MMR by loot tier. Jumping from default equipment to the green equipment in a safe environment to learn the game means they'll have 2 less tiers to swing out of their weight class. At least they stand a chance of getting evac points just for getting out of the cave, and they can buy their cool skeleton skin or their elf skin because they really like rogue. But then also at the other end, the professionals, us, I could go into the goblin caves and practice my PvP with lower level gear, right? But even if I'm doing that, that's not really good practice, because then the good players have different movement, they have different abilities, they know they want to run different perks. So in essence, it's bad practice. So these pub stompers can't do those things anymore. The best they could hope for is running purple gear up against the people who bring in green into the main dungeon. But if you're doing it as friends, it's going to be a lot harder, right? That one person, 3 people needing purple gear is a lot harder to come by, and will raise their MMR so much more, because if they want a pub stomp, they can't just run the little less than medium gear. I can't find a flaw with this, because then even the pros like me who want to do default into the main won't have to suffer through getting all these gray items. Or if average Joe Schmoes do want to squat up and say, let's take it on, they get rewarded for it with less gray items, right? It saves the time. Now, of course, the best thing that we could do is just, lower the gear strength. But this is in case, the devs want to take it this direction. If they want gear to be so strong as it is now, they're going to have to change some things. I'm hoping there's a way to change the innate points that we come in with, like strength, ability, and all that stuff. I love the marketplace, how I was able to buy the skeleton and have extra magic resist but less physical resistance, and the elf had better agility and I think less strength, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a vitality, who knows. That was amazing. That was such a cool idea by them, because you earned it through evacs. Now cosmetics like emotes and different outfits and transmogging, that's a whole nother video for another day. My idea is to highlight how we can really make it a better place in the casual learning environment for those who don't get an advanced amount of time, protecting them, but also keeping the professionals' content creation in check. Imagine, I defaulted into the regular dungeon, but then there's also, I stayed and I 1v18'd in the goblins. Like, I took my green armor and I went ham. I would still watch those videos. I don't know about you. When we get to those people who love PvE, because we've only been talking about people who love player versus player. PvE, if you love PvE, imagine you get to those points where you can actually have like the purple, you've crafted, you mined, all that kind of stuff. You've sold to the merchants, you've used the auction blocks, and you've got good gear. Now you can experience the PvE game going into the hellscape, the second floor of the main dungeon, or you could go to the high roller lobbies. You could try to be finishing the bosses. There's a lot of cool shit for the PvE, and that's way down the road, because that stuff's going to take a while to unlock. Getting all of your characters up to level 20, doing all this and that, that's the fun part. And I really want them to take this approach because I don't want a safe pocket. It creates a disconnect in this game. If a barbarian chops my head off, but then I'm like, I made it out with the golden key. It's like, no, that ruined the cycle, because these people would use the gray runs and they would try to just get to the vault, right? And if they didn't do it, they just tried again. And so it really ruined it for an average player that wanted to, try hunting other players, because the loud ones were the ones that were just running around in the gray. But the biggest thing that we're trying to avoid is just creating a meta of medium weapons and then go pub stomp, that kind of shit, because we want to keep the skill gap as close as possible in these environments. And if we have the high rollers with good gear, and we have the goblin caves with like the casuals with bad gear, that kind of stuff, to just learn the game, that medium dungeon will become amazing. that's my thought. That's my like 2 cents on the whole kind of thing. Now, I was planning on making it a huge video, and I hope you guys really enjoyed this kind of content, the pacing, and the explanation. So if there is any confusion, the biggest thing is I want people to avoid abusing matchmaking rating to punish noobs that can't fight back. That's the biggest thing I want out of this. The way we do it is by creating different environments for each player. It won't ruin matchmaking times. The thing that ruins matchmaking times is a dead game. My name is Glocktane. If you want to follow me live on twitch.tv, we've got 9,000 followers and we stream Monday through Friday. If you want to follow me on TikTok, we got 125k followers and we try to post a video once a day, just kind of some goofy shit or maybe some informational stuff on your favorite game. We're trying to get this whole YouTube thing off the ground, but we'll see how that goes. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe.